Ed here with a Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a quick update on my experience with the Sony CyberShot RX100 Mark V. Priced at $1,000 US, you're looking at the most expensive point-and-shoot camera of its kind, but also really the king of the hill in this sector of the market, and also the camera that really brought back the point and shoot, something that has been dying off with the advent of smartphones getting better and more competent when it comes to replacing the point and shoot camera. So does the 5th generation live up to all the hype? Now you can see I've added a grip to this. My RX100 Mark IV, of course, was destroyed, so it made sense to get a new one. But that's not all of you. Not everyone lost all of their gear to a hurricane, so if you own the Mark IV, I can tell you right now, I don't recommend picking up the Mark V. The Mark V is a very nice camera, has some major improvements over the Mark IV, but not everyone is going to need those, because much of the improvements that have been laid into this camera, which primarily lie in the autofocus department, which is really the big piece. The other thing is the buffer, the fact that now you can shoot over 300 shots without hesitation. Those aren't necessarily the type of things that are going to entice buyers who are looking for a quality point-and-shoot camera. I feel that's more of the stuff that amateur photographers are interested in, not to say that this class doesn't appeal to them. Of course, if you're a pro or an amateur, you already know which camera you've got to buy if you want to get the best performance for something that actually isn't going to put any weight on your back, let alone very little in your pocket. Nothing really matches up to the RX100. Panasonic has put their best foot forward, but still the RX100 and the RX10 Mark III, and I can't even wait to see what the Mark IV is going to be. Obviously, it'll incorporate this autofocus system and the buffer range. Really do make the Mark V the king of the hill. It still has that 5-minute video recording cap, which I'm not in love with. Overheating is still there. That hasn't gone away. You've got selfie mode, which is certainly nice. The 240 frames per second shooting. I put up a sample of my boy Rue. The video quality is great, no question about it. We had that, though, in the Mark IV. So this isn't a new thing in the Mark V. It's really more, again, about that autofocus system, which essentially is the same one you'll find in the Sony a6000, which is incredibly competent, especially in a fixed lens point-and-shoot of this magnitude. And that, again, is what makes this camera unique amongst the point-and-shoot world, specifically, of course, for Sony, where it just does not exist. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, I expect to see that come back or be present in the RX10 Mark IV without any hesitation. I mean, that's the only thing that camera is really missing, in my opinion. The articulating screen, pretty much the same. A little bit, it's pretty much the same size as far as I know, even though Sony's introduced an underwater enclosure for this camera. You're looking at incredibly similar performance. It's going to work with pretty much any RX100 Mark IV enclosure. So people that have asked me, will it work with the cam dive enclosure that I reviewed in the past, the answer is yes. You can pick up Sony's version, but I got to tell you, it looks a lot like the cam dive version with Sony branding. I haven't had any personal experience with it. So for those of you divers, snorkelers out there, I'm a diver myself. I can't vouch for the Sony's, performance, but I know you can still work with generic ones that are rated for the Mark IV. Keep in mind, you're not going to be able to do too much when it comes to the dial, but overall, still in video, you can absolutely manipulate slightly. Just make sure you get your settings right before you get wet. In terms of the button layout, you're looking at pretty much the same thing. The viewfinder is tucked away. OLED viewfinder, good. Do I wish there was a cup? Sure. Does your face press up against the screen? Of course it does. These are all things that I'm not wild about, but they really aren't a big deal. In terms of still low light capability, camera is incredibly competent. Video, even though we're limited to 5 minutes, is solid. We do have some rolling shutter to talk about, or not so much that I'm going to talk about, but it's there. There's not really much else to be said. So stabilization is important, even though this camera has steady shot. I highly recommend if you can use something to steady it out, you're going to get better results, because that's where this camera shines on the video side of things. And that applies to the 240 frames per second, the HFR as well. In terms of other things to point out, of course, the Super 35 video quality, the lack of pixel binning style shooting with this is definitely a nicety, but you had that with the RX100 Mark IV. Nothing's really changed in that regard. So autofocus, and of course, in addition to autofocus, we're talking about that buffer over 300 shots. That's really important. Then you can see a side-by-side. I do have a Mark IV here that I was able to get just to do a side-by-side for all of you, and eventually do a straightforward comparison, even though I've already mentioned if you already own the Mark IV, you shouldn't bother really jumping into the Mark V. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. If you're like me and you lost your Mark IV or never had a Mark IV, yeah, then there's an argument. Mark III, I can address that too. I've reviewed it. Mark II, I've reviewed that. Of course, Mark I, I've reviewed that. It all comes down to whether or not you care about the video quality, because that's what's really stepped up, and now autofocus capability in that buffer over the years. And, of course, the introduction to the pop-up OLED EVF. Previous gens, we had a modular EVF. I think that's going back to the Mark III. So, Mark II. So it's really a matter of what you're looking to get for your money. This camera right now is retailing for $900. That's the Mark IV. You're looking at $1,000 again, so $100 difference. That's why if you're fresh to the market, I'm gonna point you at the Mark V. You've already gotten close enough to $1,000. Why not get all of the added benefits? It's not a perfect camera, neither tool is, but there is a significant difference in that autofocus system quality. It's not a knock against the Mark IV. You just have to realize the Mark V has on-sensor phase and contrast capability that doesn't exist with any other CyberShot camera on the market, as I keep mentioning, except for eventually when we see the RX10 Mark IV. And who knows if they update the RX1 Mark II, and the R Mark II, that's where, the RX2 line to the 3, then we're probably going to see that integrated, that autofocus system as well applied there, since those are certainly worthy of getting it with their price point and just overall capability. Hoping to see a revamp of that lineup as well, even though it's incredibly expensive, as you all know, whether you go with no matter what you go with is what I should say. But again, both of these cameras are winners. If you want to save money and go back a previous generation, then I could absolutely make the argument. If you're going to step back to the Mark III, you're going to save some coin. But between the 5 and 4, the 4 takes it. I meant the 5 takes it. That wasn't a Freudian slip, and that's just because they're too close. If they were separated by $200 or $300, I would absolutely tell you to go with the 4. But for $100 difference, it's not just marketing. You are getting a superior piece of kit. The flash still bounces for those of you that are wondering. Nothing new there. And luckily the glass, I would have liked to have seen them revamp it. I would have liked to have seen greater battery life. But these are all, I would have liked to have seen the overheating resolved. But these are all things that Sony doesn't need to do right now for one reason and one reason only, which is that, again, no one is competing with them really. I mean, Panasonic, yes. Canon and Nikon, go smoke a cigar together. At any rate, any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. Hit that like button. And as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.